This has been a huge day. We introduced the all-new 15-inch MacBook Air, two most powerful Macs, Mac Studio, Mac Pro, iOS, iPadOS, macOS, watchOS, and of course, we announced Apple Vision Pro.
It will be available early next year on Apple.com and at Apple retail stores in the US.
Now that the dust is settled from the launch of Vision Pro during the WWDC 2023, we can take a look at some of the more realistic game-changing announcements that went unnoticed during the event. Because, let's be honest, even Apple themselves wanted people to focus more on their Vision Pro than every other announcement, which is why they had one more thing at the end of WWDC.
It's already been a big day, but we do have one more thing.
And went on to talk about the Vision Pro for 40 minutes in a 2-hour-long event. To Apple's credit, it worked, as that section of the event became the most watched portion on YouTube, and it made all the YouTubers and tech-related content creators to talk about it for more than a week.
The new Apple Vision Pro.
This is the Apple Vision Pro headset.
We're starting with the obvious eye catcher, the Vision Pro.
AR headset Vision Pro announced.
애플 비전 프로라는 이름을 달고
Поговорим про самое интересное – Vision Pro.
However, we are here to talk about the least replayed section of the event, which is the launch of Metal 3 and Game Porting Toolkit that was announced by none other than the legendary game creator Hideo Kojima. Gamers wouldn't need an introduction to Kojima. But for others, Kojima is a Japanese video game designer, director, producer, and writer. He is regarded as an author of video games and has been celebrated or even worshipped by a lot of gamers.
He would not be allowed to travel to tonight's awards ceremony to accept any awards. So we want you to know, Hideo, that we're thinking of you.
And also hated by few who thinks he is too overrated. Regardless, he is one of the well-known celebrities in the gaming industry. Therefore, the presence of him itself shows that after times and times of Apple turning their back at the gaming industry, which has been an openly known factor since Steve Jobs not thinking very highly about video games, Apple is finally attempting to take a serious dive into the gaming side. But this doesn't mean that playing video games on Mac is going to be all sunshines and rainbows. It does come with a catch. Well, the initial fact is that this was announced at the Worldwide Developer Conference, so obviously this news is more targeted towards the developers and not the consumers. This is not the worst part, as it is expected that most PC gamers know a thing or two about finding workarounds to play their games. By the way, if you are liking this video so far, we are about to launch a weekly tech series on this YouTube channel, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the weekly tech news. To give a quick summary of what Apple has announced, Apple's new Game Porting Toolkit is a software development kit that allows developers to port Windows games to macOS,
to make it even easier for developers to port their games from other platforms.
It is similar to Valve's Proton, which is used to run Windows game on the Steam Deck, which is an important point to note, and we will come back to it later. The Game Porting Toolkit is powered by source code from Crossover, a Wine-based solution for running Windows game on macOS. The best part is that it's available for free of cost. Using this tool, developers will also be able to launch an unmodified version of a Windows game on a Mac and see how well it runs before fully porting a game to a Mac. Apple also announced its newest version of macOS, which is macOS 14 Sonoma. And this brings more good news for gaming enthusiasts, as it features a game mode that prioritizes game performance. Before we move on to the revolutionary changes this brings, we should first quickly get through the issues that this announcement brings to the table. This announcement made some or a lot of open source community members upset, as they claimed that Apple simply took the Crossover 22.1.1 source code and did some patchwork on it to get thrown out to GitHub with all the modifications clumped together in a single massive file with no documentation. On top of this, since this is based on Apple's D3D Metal on DXVK, which uses the zlib license, can mean that Apple isn't obligated to release the changes or improvements. Therefore, the process of porting games to Mac from Windows will still be heavily based on game developers, and not Apple taking their time to work with Valve or other developers to make a real progress to this update. However, not all hope is lost, as we can see this as a positive beta testing that is a start to something big. The main big news about all these announcements is that for the very first time, Apple users can now run a DirectX 12 game on Mac directly. For those who don't know, DirectX is an API available on Windows and Xbox consoles that handle graphics rendering similar to Apple's Metal API.
DirectX 12 is a new graphics API from Microsoft. It is, of course, the 12th version of DirectX. And what sets this one apart from its predecessors is that its primary goal is to get huge performance gains out of the hardware that people are buying.
The first game to get DirectX 12 support with crossover has been Diablo 2 Resurrected, but users can expect support for more popular titles in the future. For people that are unaware of the Diablo series, Diablo 4 just came out last June, so we have just got to Diablo 2, and there's a long way for Apple users to have a smooth experience of more recent AAA games like Elden Ring and Cyberpunk on Mac. That being said, the gaming community isn't a group of people that just sits around and patiently waits for their product to be delivered. Now that the toolkit is available for all developers, the community members have already worked out ways to run games like Spider-Man Remastered, Hogwarts Legacy, to even titles like Elden Ring and Cyberpunk to run native 4K on ultra settings. Well, not without caveats on the way, of course. To name one, Elden Ring's anti-cheat executable needs to be renamed in order for the game to work, but that limits you from not being able to play online. Also, in some testings, interestingly, the frame rate started to increase and magically the game became playable, probably the machine taking its time to render out all the shaders. One thing to note is that even though Apple calls this an emulator,
the new Game Porting Toolkit provides an emulation environment to run your existing unmodified Windows game.
It is a Windows game translation layer that brute forces the DirectX 12 games to run through Metal 3 and other layers like Rosetta and much more layers like x84-64 to ARM64. So after going through all these translations, obviously the game won't be able to use all the performance juice from the powerful hardwares that exist in the Mac M series. Interestingly, people are having a lot of trouble running the game through Porting Toolkit on Apple's most powerful M2 Ultra, even though the title would work perfectly well on the lower end models like M1 Pro and Max. The working theory is that the Ultra model's design of having two chips fused together isn't fully compatible with the current version of the Porting Toolkit. Despite this announcement presenting itself with a lot of pros and cons, this is one of the biggest steps that we have ever seen Apple taking to really bring AAA titles to macOS. Although this doesn't mean we are anywhere near a future where we go to an Apple showroom and see a MacBook on display with spec sheets stating that it can run DirectX 12 games. This is still a big first step for a company that has time and time shown no interest in getting into the gaming industry. Who knows, if Apple can market AAA titles through their App Store to take a cut from the developers, then there's a huge chance that Apple can start bringing more updates to this game porting toolkit to change gaming on macOS forever.